Hi everyone, I'm Matt, I'm the creator of Brethren, and today I'm going to teach you how to play. For those who don't already know, Brethren is a fast-paced skirmish game designed for 28mm models, and it uses alternate activation and action points which allow units to complete certain actions. Although today we're using Vikings, you're able to use any models that use the same equipment as them. For an introduction, we're going to be using the Quick Start Guide, which is available on www.brethrentabletopwargame.com/rules. There's a few things you need to play Brethren. First of all, you need miniatures. The ones we're using are from Victrix Limited. You need a measuring device, such as a measuring tape or a long ruler. You also need dice. Roughly 12 per player should be about enough to play any size game of Brethren. You'll also need terrain. The main object of terrain is to basically provide obstacles so you aren't just attacking each other from the opposite side of the table. Most of the terrain I'm using here is from Battle Systems, and it's their cardstock terrain from their fantasy range. I'm using scatter terrain from Mantic Games, and I've made some custom walls made out of XPS foam, which is mounted on coffee stirrers. In the second half of this video, I'm going to be showing you an example turn, which will later be expanded upon as a full battle report. For this game, I've built two 250 point armies using a mixture of weapons, so you can really get a feel of how everything kind of works in the game. All of these weapons have different modifiers, from +1 attack, +1 to hit, could be +2 attack, are they able to support another unit in combat, as well as ranged weapons, which have different numbered dice for attacks and have different ranges. There's several different types of units in Brethren. These include combat heroes, support heroes, experienced infantry, untrained infantry, chariots, war elephants, artillery, and teams. Today we're going to be using combat heroes, experienced infantry, and untrained infantry. For my armies, the difference I have between the experienced and untrained is the experienced wear chainmail. One's because with an experienced infantryman they would have been able to afford better armour over time, and it's a clear difference between tunics and chainmail, so it's easy to differentiate between the two types of units. A game of Brethren is made up of a number of turns. Each of these turns is made up of a sequence of phases. These are the priority phase, the activation phase, the combat phase, and the morale phase. But before we can get into that, we need to have a look at deploying our models. First of all, there's a priority of deployment declared, which is where opposing players roll a d6, with the player with the highest result being able to start deploying first. There's two different methods of deployment. The first is where each player takes turns in placing individual models. This can work really well for smaller games, such as the 250 point game that I'm going to show. The other way is by splitting the whole army into thirds or quarters, and then placing those sections alternatingly between the players. Once all of the units have been deployed, we then go to the priority phase. In the priority phase, just like at the start of the deployment, each player rolls a d6. Player with the highest result gets to make their first activation. If players have matching result on the dice, then they're just re-rolled until one player rolls higher than the other. When you activate a unit, most units have 2 action points they're able to redeem throughout the activation phase. With these action points, they can perform the following: move, run, wait, prepare, aim, or loose. And now we're going to go through into each of these actions to see what they do. Move is where a unit can move up to the total movement value on their unit profile. For infantry, like this guy, that's going to be 6 inches. Run is the same process as a movement, however you can roll a d6 and add that result to your movement and then move up to that movement value. Wait allows a unit to delay an action for later on in the activation phase after your opponent's had a chance to activate. If you think you're under threat of attack, you can use prepare. This gives you a +1 modifier to any of your melee attacks. Aim requires a ranged weapon, and it will give you a +1 modifier to any of your ranged attacks. Loose also requires a ranged weapon, and this allows you to attack an enemy unit at range. In order to make a ranged attack, there's a few steps that you have to go through. First, you have to declare your target, then see if they're in range. Then you roll to see if you can hit them, and if you successfully hit them, you then see if you wound them. So first, declaring a target. Any enemy unit that is in line of sight is eligible to be attacked with a ranged weapon. Once you've declared who you're going to attack, then using your tape measure or ruler, you check to see if they're in range. If the target is in range, you're able to proceed to the next step. If they're not in range, then the ranged attack counts as having missed. Once you know your target's in range, you then roll to see if they hit. Using the ranged weapon profile, you check to see how many attacks you have, and then roll that many attacks against your opponent. And the defending unit always rolls a single dice. If the attacking units are higher than the defenders, then they have successfully hit. If they're equal or lower, then unfortunately they would have missed. If there is an obstruction between you and your target, it reduces the result of the dice from your ranged attack by 1. If you've successfully hit, then you roll to see if you wound. You then roll those again and compare the result to the defense for that unit, which is shown on their unit profile. Once a unit reaches 0 health, they're removed from play. Activating a hero is the same process as activating a normal unit. However, a certain type of hero, that be a combat hero, is able to give orders to other units around them. These orders are group move, group run, shield formation, and charge. Only units that haven't yet activated are able to follow those orders. The first of these is group move. All units move up to the distance shown on their unit profile, but they must start and end their movement within 6 inches of the hero that's activated them. Once they've made their move, they can then do one of 2 secondary actions. These are prepare or loose. Whichever action is chosen, all units following that order have to do the same secondary action. Next, it's group run. Just like a normal run, you roll a d6 and add that result to your movement. This result is added to all of the units that are taking part of the order. And just like a group move, they must start and end their movement within 6 inches of the hero. Next, we've got the shield formation. This order requires the hero giving the order to be equipped with a shield. And any model that's within 6 inches of that hero, they move into base contact with either the hero giving the order or another unit following the order. Once they've taken position, they can then do a movement of up to 3 inches. When in a shield formation, all units get +1 defense from the front, as in the direction that they're facing, but get -1 defense from the rear. And finally, we've got a charge. First of all, you choose the charge target. Just like a ranged attack, this is any unit that is within line of sight. Once you've picked a target, any other enemy unit that is within 6 inches of the chosen unit also become charged targets. Once those charged targets have been declared, the player giving the order rolls a d6. Just like a run, this is added to the total movement value of those units. Then, all of the charging units must move as far as they can in order to reach their opponent. If they reach their opponent, they get an extra attack to use in the combat phase. However, if they fail to reach their opponent, they get no extra attacks, and their defense is reduced by 1 for the rest of the turn. Once all of the units have activated by following these actions, we then move on to the combat phase. Any unit that has reached base contact with an opponent in the activation phase must then fight in the combat phase. The combat phase is broken up into individual duels, or as much as possible, and the player with priority can choose which of these fights take place first. Once a fight has been picked, there's a few steps that need to be followed. First of all, you determine the number of attacks you have. Then, players roll to see if they hit each other. The player that's managed to hit their opponent then rolls to wound, and if necessary, units may need to fall back. First, to determine attacks. Each unit has a certain number of attacks. These are shown in the attacks column on the unit profile. Depending on the weapons that they're equipped with, these may also provide extra attacks. These are added to the initial attacks on the unit profile, as well as any extra attacks for charging if they charged in the activation phase. Once both players have determined the amount of dice they need, the attacks are then rolled simultaneously, and the dice with the highest result are successful hits. If both players have rolled the same highest result, any dice with a lower result are discarded, and those tying dice are re-rolled. Once you have your total number of hits, those successful hits are re-rolled, and the result is compared to the defense shown on the unit profile. Just like a ranged attack, if the result is higher than that unit's defense, then that successfully wounds that unit. And again, once a unit's health reaches 0, they're removed from play. If a unit has been successfully defeated in the combat phase, but hasn't lost any health or hasn't lost all of its health, it must fall back 1 inch away from combat. If, however, there is an obstruction, like a piece of terrain or an enemy, that stops them from being able to fall back a full inch away from combat, they become desperate. When a unit is desperate, they have to repeat the fight that they've just done. For each repeated combat, the desperate unit gains an extra attack but loses 1 defense. This stacks until their defense reaches 1. Once all the fights have been completed, the combat phase ends, and we move to the morale phase. In the morale phase, The player that's lost the most amount of units throughout that turn could then be forced to make a morale check. The player that's lost the least amount of units in that turn, using one of their heroes, picks an enemy unit within 6 inches of their hero. Once they've picked their target, any other enemy unit within 6 inches of that chosen unit must also make a morale check. If there are no enemy units within 6 inches of one of the heroes, or both players lost the same amount of units within that turn, no morale check is made. The player making the morale check goes to each of their units. Each unit has to roll 2 dice, adding the result together. If the result of these 2 dice is higher than the morale value shown on the unit profile, the unit runs away. If it's the same or lower, then the unit remains. Once all of these phases have been completed, the turn ends, and you then begin the next turn, starting again with the priority phase. Now that we've gone through all of the phases and actions, I'm now going to show you an example turn. This example turn is turn 2 of the battle report that I'll be showing in another video. I'll narrate step by step with what the units are doing and the decision behind the player's actions. So, going into the start of the turn, we've got the priority phase. Here you can see I rolled doubles for both sides priority. So I kept re-rolling until I got a higher result. And the blue team go first. So in anticipation of being charged, the blue team have decided to form a shield formation. Because the hero's got 3 action points, he moved up with 1, and then with his remaining 2, he called the shield formation. So now it's the red team's turn to activate, and they decided to move up an archer and try and shoot at the unarmoured guy at the front. The bow has 1 attack die, so he'll be rolling a single die against the defender's single die. The blue got a higher result, so it missed. In response to that, the blue archer has now gone to shoot the red archer that hasn't yet shot. Just as before, he missed. So now the reds have decided to activate someone so he can meet an archer in battle. Then the blue goes into support. So with the large group of units, the reds didn't want to risk charging and have a lower defense, so they decided to run into the shield wall. But unfortunately, only had enough movement for 1 unit to get into combat. So he was off screen a little bit, but there was a blue archer at the top that then moved down to try and get into a better position so he could target one of the enemy units. And he missed. So the red team are now focused on getting as many troops into combat as they can. So the red archer that hasn't yet shot has decided to target one of the guys not in combat in the shield wall. Because there's a couple of fences in between the attacker and his target, the target will gain the benefit of cover, meaning the attacker's dice is reduced by 1. And unfortunately, he missed. The red team decided to run with that guy, but unfortunately, he didn't have enough movement in order to get into the fight. So with all of the units activated, we now go into the combat phase. First off, we're going to resolve the combat at the bottom. And as you can see here, I'm just pointing out who's going to be fighting who. So the blue guy with the Dane axe is fighting the one guy on his own, and then the unarmoured soldier and the archer are both fighting the armoured swordsman from the red team. First it's the fight between the blue warrior with the Dane axe against his one opponent. He does manage to successfully hit, however he's not able to wound, so his opponent withdraws by 1 inch. Now we go to the red swordsman fighting the two opponents. So here I've given another coloured dice for the archer. This is because the archer is only equipped with a knife, which is -1 to hit, so his dice is going to be hitting at a disadvantage, while the other ones aren't. Because both players rolled the result of a 6, all of the lower dice are discarded, with those 6s being re-rolled. Because the red soldier rolled a dice that was high enough to wound, it was down to the blue player to decide which unit was going to be removed. So now with those resolved, we're now going to go up to the shield formation, with the hero from the red team fighting the blue warrior. So because he's a hero, he's got 3 attacks, and he's got another 2 for his Dane, that gives him 5. And that did successfully kill him, so he has been removed. Now that he's been removed, the model that's on his own in that shield formation no longer receives the bonus for being in it. As you can see, there are 2 units that are still in base contact that fought in previous fights, but because they're still in base contact, they now have to fight each other. Because he failed to wound, he just withdraws by 1 inch. Now that all the combats are being resolved, we move on to the morale phase. The blue side lost the most models, so they're subject to a morale test. And as you can see, I'm just going up the line, making sure that anyone that's been chosen to do a morale check just does them. And this was quite a lucky round for morale, because no one left. A lot of the time, morale can be quite brutal, and you may end up losing more troops from the morale checks than you did in the combat phase. And that's the end of the turn. As you can see, it plays very, very quick, and because of the alternate activation and simultaneous dice rolling from ranged attacks and melee attacks, both players are engaged the entire time. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe, and make sure to follow Brethren on Facebook and Instagram, as well as checking out the free quick start guide on the website. And if you want to go one step further, buy the book on Amazon. Hope you like what you saw. Thank you for watching.